In the vast and infinite stretches of space, humanity's ambitious leap into the cosmos had begun with the launch of its first interstellar fleet, Sol 1. The ships, though awe-inspiring to those who understood their significance, were mere specks compared to the colossal fleets of the galaxy's dominant powers. Among these powers were the Kroval Dominion and the Zardak Syndicate, two empires that had established their terrifying reputations over millennia. Their fleets were massive, each ship a war machine capable of wiping out entire civilizations with ease. So, when humanity launched its humble fleet, a collection of just a handful of vessels, the galaxy laughed. To the Kroval and Zardak, this fleet was a joke, a fleeting curiosity destined to be lost in the vastness of space. They saw humanity's ambition as naive, thinking it was merely a desperate grasp for significance in an already crowded universe. The leaders of these empires mocked humanity's efforts, dismissing the Sol 1 fleet as nothing more than a symbolic gesture, a childish attempt to be taken seriously by the galactic elite. They viewed the human fleet as a tiny, insignificant spark in the shadows of giants. They could barely comprehend how humanity had managed to reach this far into the stars, and yet, the idea that this small fleet could pose a real challenge to the galaxy's established powers was laughable. These empires had wiped out entire species in the blink of an eye, so the thought of a handful of human ships making a dent in their power was preposterous. Yet, there was something about this fleet that stirred an odd sense of curiosity in the hearts of a few. But those who questioned the dismissive attitudes of the galactic powers were quickly silenced. Even the species that had once allied with humanity in the past began to doubt them, placing their bets on the strength of established empires. The idea of humanity being more than just a blip on the galactic radar seemed absurd. Most assumed that Sol 1's mission was just a fleeting dream, a group of explorers trying to find their place in a universe too vast for them to conquer. The galaxy's elites turned their gaze elsewhere, to more pressing matters, or so they thought. And yet, in the midst of all this, humanity persisted. The fleet's officers, led by the determined Admiral Laura Grays, knew the galaxy's opinion of them, but they had a belief that no amount of ridicule could shake. They didn't care that their fleet was small or their resources limited. They were determined to prove themselves. However, as they ventured deeper into uncharted space, they quickly realized that the universe was not the peaceful, unexplored frontier they had imagined. In the quiet darkness of deep space, something ancient and dangerous was stirring, something the galaxy's superpowers had never seen, or perhaps something they had long forgotten. As the fleet moved further into the unknown, their confidence was met with unsettling silence, and an eerie sense of something lurking just out of sight began to settle over the crew. No one knew it yet, but their mockery would soon turn into fear. As humanity pushed forward into the great unknown, the tiny fleet, underestimated by all, was about to face a challenge that would change the fate of the galaxy forever. A storm was brewing, one that no one could have predicted, least of all those who had dismissed humanity as nothing more than a curiosity. The universe, it seemed, had underestimated humanity's ability to survive, and the galaxy's greatest powers would soon regret laughing at what they considered a tiny fleet. The calm before the storm was only temporary. The real battle for survival had just begun. As the Sol 1 fleet ventured further into the uncharted regions of space, far beyond the known borders of the galaxy, they were blissfully unaware of the darkness that was slowly awakening in the depths of the cosmos. The fleet's mission was simple: explore new worlds, establish outposts, and gather information for humanity's future in the stars. Yet, as the tiny fleet pressed forward, the galaxy's mocking voices seemed to echo behind them, as if their mission was nothing more than a dream that would end in failure. Meanwhile, deep in the forgotten corners of the galaxy, a forgotten nightmare stirred. For millennia, the X-Tar hive, a predatory and terrifying species, had been dormant, hidden in the shadows of space, waiting for the right moment to awaken. This species, once a feared terror, had been driven into hiding by ancient galactic wars, but now, with their hunger growing and their need for expansion desperate, They were ready to emerge from their slumber. The Sol 1 fleet, focused on the stars before them, unknowingly drifted closer to the heart of the X-Star territory. It was during one of their standard explorations that the crew of the Sol 1 made a discovery that would change everything. While scanning a seemingly lifeless planet, the fleet stumbled upon the remains of an ancient ship, drifting in the void like a ghost of a forgotten past. The ship was unlike anything humanity had encountered before: twisted metal, strange markings, and the unmistakable sign of something powerful and ancient. Curious, the humans decided to investigate, unaware that they had just crossed paths with a long-lost enemy. As they boarded the derelict vessel, the crew found evidence of a once powerful civilization, one that had been wiped out, not by war or disease, but by the X-Star themselves. The ship's logs revealed horrifying accounts of entire planets being consumed by the hive. But even more chilling was the realization that the X-Star were not gone. They were very much alive, and they were watching. Moments after making this discovery, the Sol 1 crew found themselves under attack. The X-Star, sensing the humans' presence, unleashed a terrifying assault. From the dark corners of the derelict ship, grotesque creatures, once thought to be myths, began to emerge. These monstrous beings, with their unearthly speed and ferocity, were unlike anything humanity had prepared for. The fleet's commander, Admiral Laura Graves, immediately ordered an evacuation and a defensive stand. Despite their small numbers, the humans fought with everything they had. Using their advanced technology, they were able to push back the first wave of the X-Star, laser cannons and energy shields flaring as the two sides clashed in the cold expanse of space. The battle was brutal, and many lives were lost, but humanity's ingenuity and adaptability shone through. With quick thinking and the use of their superior tactics, the Sol 1 fleet managed to destroy the first wave of X-Star attackers. As the dust settled, the humans took stock of the cost of their victory. The damage to the fleet was extensive, and several ships had been crippled in the fight. Yet, despite the casualties, the humans had managed to defeat the X-Star's initial assault. However, the victory came with a haunting realization: the X-Star were only beginning to stir. Word of humanity's encounter with the hive spread quickly, and the galaxy's superpowers, those who had once laughed at the tiny fleet, could not ignore the implications of what had just occurred. Their ridicule grew louder, but now it was tinged with something darker: fear. The X-Star were an ancient species, and the mere fact that humanity had survived the first wave was an anomaly. As reports of the battle reached the galactic powers, they began to realize the potential danger the X-Star posed, not just to humanity, but to the entire galaxy. The Sol 1 fleet, now battered and scarred, had unwittingly awakened a terror that no one had prepared for. The galaxy may have dismissed humanity's fleet as insignificant, but in the cold vastness of space, humanity had just made its first, dangerous move on the galactic stage. And what came next would shake the very foundations of the universe. After their unexpected victory against the first wave of X-Star attackers, the Sol 1 fleet was left with a fragile sense of triumph. Though they had survived, the victory felt hollow in the face of the overwhelming threat still looming in the shadows of space. The fleet had barely recovered when another wave of X-Star ships appeared on the radar, this time in much greater numbers. The fleet's scanners detected hundreds of these terrifying vessels, swarming like a cloud of locusts in the vastness of space. It was clear now that the X-Star hive was much more than a rogue group of predatory creatures. They were a massive, coordinated force, hungry for conquest, and their appetites seemed insatiable. The X-Star's ships, covered in grotesque, organic matter, appeared out of nowhere, flooding into the systems that humanity had only just begun to explore. No longer was this just a skirmish. The X-Star had come for something far bigger. Admiral Graves and her fleet, now desperately trying to regroup and plan their next move, found themselves fighting a battle on multiple fronts. The X-Star struck quickly and without mercy, cutting down anything that stood in their way. As each battle unfolded, it became painfully clear that humanity's fleet, despite its advanced technology and superior tactics, was not equipped to handle such a relentless assault. The X-Tar seemed to multiply by the day, their ships crashing into the human fleet like a swarm of vicious predators. The cost of every victory was high, and the losses began to mount. Ships were destroyed, and human lives were lost in droves, but the fleet refused to back down. Their resilience, however, was not enough to halt the overwhelming force of the X-Tar. At this point, the galactic powers, previously so quick to mop humanity's efforts, could no longer ignore the situation. The Krevo Dominion, a militaristic empire known for its ruthless efficiency, and the Zardak Syndicate, a cunning and technologically advanced species, were the first to take notice of the rising tide of destruction. Both empires had long considered humanity to be a minor player in the grand scheme of things, but now they saw the destruction of the X-Tar as a potential threat to the entire galaxy. While the Dominion and Syndicate feared the rising power of the Hive, they also feared what might happen if humanity managed to grow stronger. The question was no longer whether the X-Tar posed a danger, it was whether humanity could survive the coming storm. The Krivor and Zardak made their move, but their assistance came only after much hesitation. They offered support, but it was minimal, perhaps enough to give the Sol One fleet some breathing room, but not nearly enough to turn the tide of the war. It was clear that both empires were underestimating the strength of the X-Tar and, more dangerously, underestimating the humans' ability to survive against all odds. The support they offered was cold and calculated, and their commanders treated humanity's fleet as a side issue. They still viewed the humans as beneath them, but the reality was, humanity had become a wild card in a dangerous game. As the X-Tar closed in on their prey, the galactic powers feared the unexpected could happen, and that fear turned to frustration as they realized they had no way of controlling the outcome. While the Krivor and Zardak stood at the sidelines, bickering over how much they should help, the humans continued to fight for their very survival. The Sol One fleet faced a constant barrage of X-Tar ships, with each day feeling like an eternity. The battle seemed endless, and as humanity's fleet lost more ships and more lives, the weight of their struggle pressed heavily on every officer and crew member. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, there was something in the humans that set them apart from their enemies. They had faced extinction before, and they had never backed down. This, perhaps, was their greatest strength. As the galactic powers continued to watch from afar, waiting to see if humanity would falter or rise, the human fleet's resolve only hardened. They were no longer just fighting the X-Tar, they were fighting a galaxy that still believed they were weak. The Sol One fleet, against all odds, stood firm in the face of an enemy that seemed unbeatable, and the question now was no longer whether humanity would survive. It was how much further they could push the limits of survival before the galaxy was forced to take them seriously. As the battle raged on, the true nature of the war became clear. This wasn't just about defeating the X-Tar. It was about proving that humanity was no longer the galaxy's punchline. The situation was dire. The once proud Sol One fleet, now battered and broken, faced a relentless onslaught from the X-Tar Hive. Every day, it seemed like the very fabric of their mission was slipping further from their grasp. Morale was at an all-time low. The crew members who had once boldly looked to the stars now stared into the cold void of space with exhaustion and fear in their eyes. The losses were piling up, and the fleet was being pushed back toward the edge of the galaxy. Many whispered that they might not survive much longer, and some even thought about retreating. But in the darkest moments, when defeat seemed certain, humanity's resolve would ignite. Admiral Laura Graves, her face weathered by the pressure of command, gathered her officers in a tight meeting. She reminded them of the countless times humanity had faced impossible odds and prevailed. She spoke of Earth's history, the rise from the ashes of war, the space race, and the journey to the stars. "We don't retreat. We adapt. We fight. And we win," she declared, her voice steady with conviction. Her words sparked a fire in the crew. Despite the overwhelming forces arrayed against them, they refused to surrender. The humans of the Sol 1 fleet rallied together, pulling every ounce of strength they had left. They set up a daring defense at a strategic intergalactic outpost, a place that would give them a temporary advantage, but also put them at great risk. The outpost, a small station orbiting a barren planet, was not equipped to withstand a full-scale invasion. But the humans weren't looking for a stand-up fight. They were preparing to make the X-Tar pay for every inch of space they tried to claim. Using guerrilla tactics learned from humanity's long history of conflict, the Sol 1 fleet turned the outpost into a fortress. Ships that were once considered too damaged to fight were repurposed for hit-and-run tactics. The crew worked around the clock, repairing systems, setting up traps, and honing their strategy. They knew that every battle might be their last, but they weren't going to go down quietly. With cutting-edge technology and their unrivaled creativity, humanity showed the galaxy what they were truly capable of. The X-Tar had never encountered a foe like this before. They were used to overwhelming their enemies with brute force, crushing them under the weight of their numbers. But the humans didn't fight like the X-Tar expected. They fought with precision, luring the invaders into traps, striking when the enemy least expected it. Each counterattack was a surprise, each victory, a reminder that humanity was not just a fleet of a few ships. They were a force to be reckoned with. The X-Tar, shocked by the humans' ingenuity, began to doubt their own superiority. The Hive had never faced an enemy that adapted so quickly, that fought so intelligently. The humans didn't fight like warriors, they fought like survivors, using everything they had to turn the tide. For the first time, the X-Tar found themselves losing ground. Ships that were supposed to be easy targets now became the hunters, picking off X-Tar vessels with surprising skill. The once unstoppable Hive was now on the defensive, struggling to cope with the unexpected tactics humanity was throwing at them. Word of the Sol 1 fleet's surprising successes spread through the galaxy like wildfire. The galactic powers who had once scoffed at humanity's tiny fleet began to listen. For the first time, doubt crept into their minds. Could humanity really be a threat? Could they have underestimated the human resolve? The Kryvor Dominion and the Zardak Syndicate, who had offered minimal help, now watched cautiously from the sidelines. Their earlier assumptions, that the X-Tar would crush humanity with ease, began to unravel. It was no longer just about the X-Tar, it was about something bigger. The human fleet was no longer just a nuisance. They were proving to be the thorn in the side of the galaxy's greatest powers. The battle was far from over, but the humans had shown that they were no longer the underdogs. The X-Tar was stunned, the galactic powers were questioning their assumptions, and the Sol 1 fleet was rising above their limitations. With each victory, however small, humanity's legend grew. They had become more than just explorers. They had become the galaxy's last hope against a force that seemed unstoppable. And no matter how dark the path ahead seemed, the humans of the Sol 1 fleet knew one thing for certain: they would never give in. They had a history of overcoming the impossible, and they weren't about to let a galactic empire or an ancient predator end their fight. As the war with the X-Tar Hive continued, the Sol 1 fleet found itself growing more desperate, yet more determined. They had learned to fight back with tactics and technology that no one had expected from such a small fleet. But as they pushed forward, a chilling truth began to emerge, one that would change everything. Humanity had believed that the X-Tar were simply predators, a dangerous species driven by their insatiable hunger to consume worlds. But as the Sol 1 crew examined more captured X-Tar ships and analyzed the strange remnants they'd found, they began to piece together a far darker truth. The Hive was not just a biological survival mechanism, it was something far more sinister. What they had originally thought to be the X-Tar's mindless drive to consume was, in fact, part of a much larger plan: galactic domination. The Hive was not merely expanding to survive, it was expanding to conquer, to absorb entire civilizations into their collective. The X-Tar were not mindless creatures. They were a species with a singular, terrifying goal: galactic control. The breakthrough came when a team of human researchers, led by Dr. Marcus Vance, uncovered an ancient X-TAR artifact hidden within a derelict ship. It was an object unlike anything humanity had encountered before, part biological, part mechanical, and pulsating with a strange, unnatural energy. It seemed to resonate with the hive itself. When they managed to decipher the artifact's data, a chilling revelation came to light. The X-TAR had been planning for eons, and their ultimate goal was not just to consume the galaxy, but to assimilate every advanced species, every intelligent being, into their hive. The artifact revealed maps of X-TAR colonies, spanning across distant star systems, all leading to one final devastating plan: the total annihilation of any resistance and the eventual absorption of the entire galaxy. The X-TAR would absorb entire civilizations, their knowledge, their power, adding it to their hive's growing collective consciousness. And once they had consumed enough, the galaxy itself would be remade in their image, with no room for any species to exist independently. Humanity, along with countless other species, would be swallowed whole. With this new information, the humans realized that the battle had shifted from survival to something far more critical. The X-TAR weren't just a threat to humanity, they were a threat to every sentient species in the galaxy. And if they were allowed to continue unchecked, it was only a matter of time before the hive would reach Earth and beyond, consuming everything in its path. The humans were no longer just fighting for their own survival. They were fighting to preserve the very idea of free will, of independent civilizations existing in the stars. The stakes had never been higher. Admiral Graves and her command staff knew they could no longer wait for reinforcements from the galactic powers that had only offered minimal support. They had to act quickly. But with their fleet so small and their resources stretched thin, they knew it was a perilous gamble. The X-TAR hive was vast, and its forces were growing stronger every day. But humanity had something the X-TAR didn't: determination. Using their newfound knowledge of the hive's intentions, the humans began to formulate a daring plan. They would strike at the heart of the X-TAR, at the very core of their hive, the place where their collective consciousness resided. It was the only way to sever the hive's control and prevent their total domination. If the humans could succeed in disrupting the hive, they might stand a chance at stopping the X-TAR's rampage before it consumed the galaxy. The plan was risky. The Sol 1 fleet would need to navigate through hostile X-TAR space, infiltrating deep into enemy territory. The X-TAR would undoubtedly be prepared for such an assault, and the humans would be heavily outnumbered. But the possibility of stopping the hive, of saving countless species, including their own, was too great to ignore. Humanity had already proven they were capable of the impossible, and now they were about to make the boldest move of all. As the fleet began preparations, every crew member knew that this mission could be their last, but they were willing to make the sacrifice. The fate of the galaxy rested in their hands, and for the first time, humanity was no longer fighting just for survival. They were fighting for the future of the entire galaxy. The revelation had sparked a new fire in them, and as the Sol 1 fleet set their course for the heart of the hive, they knew one thing for certain: they would not let the galaxy fall to the X-TAR, not on their watch. With the revelation of the X-TAR hive's true nature, humanity's role in the galaxy had shifted from the underdog to an unexpected beacon of hope. The Sol 1 fleet, once dismissed as a joke by the galactic powers, had proved that they were not only survivors, they were a force to be reckoned with. But humanity could not stand alone in this fight. The X-TAR hive was too vast, too powerful. To defeat the hive, humanity would need allies. And so Admiral Graves and her team worked tirelessly to form an alliance with other species that shared their fear of the X-TAR's rising dominance. The Krovo Dominion and the Zardak Syndicate, who had once barely acknowledged humanity's existence, were now forced to face the reality of the threat. The Krovo, known for their ruthless efficiency, saw the potential of an alliance with humanity, while the Zardak, ever calculating and strategic, recognized the human fleet's growing influence and resourcefulness. Reluctantly, both empires agreed to support the humans, but their assistance was less out of camaraderie and more out of necessity. The real reason they agreed, however, was humanity's unwavering determination and bold leadership. The Sol One fleet had inspired not just fear in the X-Tar, but a sense of possibility in other species that had long feared extinction. They had shown that even the smallest of fleets could hold their ground and turn the tide of battle. Now together they would strike back. The united fleet, now a diverse and formidable force, began to assemble in secret. The plan was simple but perilous: an all-out assault on the X-Tar homeworld, deep in the heart of their territory. The X-Tar Hive had built an impenetrable fortress around their planet, filled with advanced defenses and deadly traps. The mere thought of assaulting the Hive seemed like madness. But the human fleet, with its ingenuity, had a plan of their own. They would breach the Hive's defenses, not with brute force, but with precision. Every ship, from the smallest vessel to the most powerful warship, would play a crucial role in the assault. Every officer, every crew member, would need to work in perfect coordination. And for the first time, the galaxy's mightiest powers, the Krovor and the Zardak, would follow humanity's lead. The battle that followed was nothing short of a nightmare. The X-Tar Hive had anticipated an attack, and their defenses were nearly insurmountable. But humanity's tactical brilliance, honed through years of desperate survival, was on full display. The human fleet, now bolstered by their allies, moved with a unity and purpose that none of the X-Tar had expected. They struck from multiple directions, using the X-Tar's overconfidence against them. Their guerrilla tactics, perfected in the earlier stages of the war, were now being used in full force. Ships darted in and out of the Hive's defenses, laying traps, launching precision strikes, and drawing the X-Tar forces into chaos. The X-Tar, used to crushing their enemies with overwhelming force, found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. But even with all their ingenuity, the humans knew that breaking the Hive's defenses would not be easy. They had to go deeper, get closer to the heart of the Hive itself. It was there, in the core of the X-Tar's domain, that the true danger lay: the Hive's central consciousness, the brain that controlled every X-Tar in existence. If they could sever the Hive's connection to the rest of the galaxy, they could destroy it once and for all. The final assault was a desperate, all-or-nothing push. The combined fleet pushed toward the Hive's central core, a pulsating mass of alien technology and living flesh. It was the very heart of the X-Tar and humanity's last hope. In a final, unexpected move, it was the Sol One fleet's flagship, the Resolute, that made the decisive strike. Using a combination of cutting-edge human technology and sheer force of will, the Resolute breached the core, detonating a series of weapons designed to destabilize the Hive's central consciousness. The explosion tore through the Hive like a storm, sending shockwaves across the galaxy. For the first time, the X-Tar found themselves in disarray. The Hive's grip on the galaxy shattered, and its forces, now leaderless and confused, fell into chaos. In the aftermath, humanity and their allies stood victorious. The X-Tar Hive, the greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced, was destroyed. The victory, however, was not without sacrifice. Many ships were lost in the final assault, and countless lives had been given for the cause. But as the remnants of the Sol One fleet limped back from the heart of X-Tar space, there was no doubt in anyone's mind. Humanity's tiny fleet had not only survived, they had saved the galaxy. The galaxy now understood what humanity was capable of. Against all odds, the humans had proven that even the smallest force, when united and driven by determination, could change the course of history. The X-Tar had underestimated humanity, and in the end, it was their biggest mistake. The humans had become the galaxy's last line of defense, and in their final stand, they had proven that sometimes the smallest of fleets could make the biggest impact. The galaxy, once a vast and unpredictable expanse, was now forever changed. The defeat of the X-Tar Hive had sent shockwaves through the cosmos, and humanity stood at the center of it all. The Sol One fleet, which had once been mocked by the galactic powers for its size and ambition, had now become a symbol of strength, resilience, and ingenuity. The Krevo Dominion and the Zardak Syndicate, once dismissive of humanity's attempts to carve out a place for itself in the stars, were forced to face the truth. Humanity had earned its place among the galaxy's greatest powers. The X-Star had been a force like no other, and yet it was humanity's tiny fleet that had delivered the decisive blow. The victory was a testament to the spirit of humanity, to their ability to adapt and overcome in the face of impossible odds. It wasn't just a military victory, it was a moral victory, one that resonated across the stars. The Krivor and Zardak, humbled by humanity's unexpected triumph, began to reassess their own positions. The once proud empires now saw humanity not as a nuisance, but as an equal power in the galaxy. Their attitudes shifted, no longer treating humanity with the scorn they once had. Instead, they now sought alliances with the Sol One fleet, recognizing that the humans' unexpected brilliance was something to be valued. The humans had proven that they were not only capable of surviving, but of leading, of making decisions that would shape the galaxy's future. In the wake of their victory, the Sol One fleet grew, both in numbers and in capability. Humanity's technological advancements, honed through years of desperate struggle, had transformed the fleet into a much more formidable force. With their newfound allies, the humans continued their exploration of the galaxy, their eyes now focused on the future. The once dismissive empires no longer viewed the Sol One fleet with derision, but with respect, recognizing that the human fleet held the key to a new era where cooperation, rather than dominance, could define the future. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Underestimating humanity was a grave mistake. For humanity, the victory was sweet, but they knew it was just the beginning. The defeat of the X-Star Hive had been a monumental achievement, but there was much more to be done. New challenges would inevitably arise, new threats would emerge, and humanity's place in the galaxy would continue to be tested. But they were no longer the naive explorers they had once been. The Sol One fleet and humanity itself had evolved. They were no longer fighting simply for survival, they were fighting for a future, for the freedom and independence of every species in the galaxy. And with that newfound purpose, humanity began to forge ahead, ready to tackle whatever lay ahead. The Krevo, Zardak, and countless other species began to work alongside humanity, forming a coalition that sought to protect the galaxy from threats both known and unknown. The idea of collaboration, once foreign to the galaxy's largest empires, became a new norm. It wasn't just about power anymore, it was about unity. The galactic powers now recognized that they could not thrive in isolation. The future lay in cooperation, and humanity had shown them the way. As the Sol One fleet ventured deeper into the unknown reaches of space, humanity's place in the cosmos was no longer uncertain. They had proven themselves in the most harrowing of circumstances, and their actions had forever altered the course of galactic history. The X-Star, once a looming shadow of destruction, were now nothing more than a painful memory, a testament to humanity's indomitable will. But while the galaxy celebrated the end of the X-Star threat, humanity knew that their true journey had only just begun. The stars were vast, full of unknown wonders and dangers, and humanity was ready to explore them all. The galaxy had learned the value of underestimating humanity, and now every species, from the smallest to the most powerful, would think twice before ever doing so again. In the quiet aftermath of the war, as the Sol One fleet continued its mission, the future seemed full of promise. The once mocked tiny fleet had become the heart of a new era, one where hope, unity, and resilience would guide them forward. Humanity had not only earned its place in the galaxy, they had become its guardians, and the story of their journey was just beginning. The galaxy would never be the same again, and neither would humanity.